The royal jewels have always been perceived by the world as ultimate emblems of historical grandeur, breathtaking aesthetic beauty, and unbroken institutional continuity. Hidden away behind heavily fortified vaults and protected by centuries-old, unyielding protocols, these priceless artifacts represent the very soul of the British monarchy. However, beneath the sparkling surface of these historic diamonds, a completely different and far more turbulent narrative was quietly unfolding within the private quarters of the palace. This was a narrative centered on a mysterious, highly confidential document that absolutely no one outside a very tight circle was ever supposed to lay eyes upon. According to well-placed palace insiders, this hidden letter was intimately connected to the final, deeply personal wishes of the late Queen Elizabeth II regarding the future stewardship of the crown's most significant heirlooms. When Prince William eventually stumbled upon this document and uncovered the staggering implications of its contents, it reportedly sparked one of the most explosive and emotionally charged confrontations the modern monarchy has witnessed in recent memory. For generations, the magnificent pieces comprising the royal collection had signified something vastly more profound than mere material wealth or glittering prestige. They were physical manifestations of historical duty, representing a sacred legacy meticulously handed down from one sovereign era to the absolute next. Every delicate tiara, diamond necklace, and historic brooch carried the heavy weight of royal responsibility, serving as an unbreakable golden thread that linked the contemporary monarchy directly to the iconic sovereigns of the past. It is precisely because of this immense symbolic power that any discussions surrounding the future ownership and distribution of these treasures were handled with the utmost seriousness and secrecy. Within the inner sanctum of the royal household, these items were never viewed as personal property to be distributed based on individual whims or fleeting favoritism. They were regarded as a sacred trust belonging to the institution itself. For many years, an overwhelming consensus had formed both inside and outside palace walls that Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was destined to become the primary custodian of the most prestigious pieces in the collection. Catherine's gradual and deliberate rise within the ranks of the royal family had been defined by an extraordinary display of patience, impeccable discipline, and an unwavering, quiet dedication to public service. She had successfully navigated the immense pressures of royal life, earning the deep respect of senior members of the household and capturing the admiration of millions globally. More importantly, persistent whispers from within the palace suggested that the late Queen Elizabeth II had recognized a rare, stabilizing quality in Catherine, a characteristic that firmly convinced the monarch that the future queen would fully comprehend the spiritual and constitutional weight of the inheritance she would eventually receive. Yet, beneath this carefully curated image of seamless family unity, subtle and deeply concerning fractures were starting to appear. Highly sensitive reports indicate that conversations surrounding the precise allocation of specific pieces within the massive royal collection had become increasingly tense during the twilight years of Queen Elizabeth's historic reign. Conflicting interpretations of confidential conversations began to spread quietly among seasoned palace staff, creating a wave of internal anxiety. Some factions claimed that explicit, legally binding written instructions had been left behind regarding who should manage the jewels, while others firmly maintained that no such formal directives existed. This growing cloud of uncertainty created an atmosphere ripe for internal speculation, but very few individuals could have ever anticipated that the definitive answer was already recorded inside a highly classified letter, tucked away completely out of public sight. What made this escalating situation remarkably intriguing and potentially dangerous were the persistent murmurs that this pivotal document had been intentionally withheld from the very people whose futures it directly impacted. According to deeply embedded insiders, key members of the royal family had been kept entirely in the dark regarding the letter's existence for several years. The document had reportedly sat undisturbed within a highly restricted archive of private records, closely guarded by those responsible for executing the late Queen's final personal arrangements. However, rumors continuously suggested that one specific individual within the palace may have had full knowledge of this letter long before the rest of the family. The name that repeatedly surfaced in connection with these hushed whispers was none other than Queen Camilla, whose institutional authority and influence within the palace machinery had grown exponentially since the accession of King Charles III. Initially, these quiet rumors were largely dismissed as standard palace gossip, the kind of endless speculation that naturally thrives within the isolated world of royal courts. But as the months rolled on, the unanswered questions began to multiply at an alarming rate, creating a sense of urgency that could no longer be suppressed. Why had this specific letter been kept so thoroughly concealed from the immediate heirs? What exact directives were written upon those pages? And if the document truly addressed the foundational inheritance of the crown's historic treasures, why had its contents never been brought to the table for an open, transparent family discussion? The complete lack of clear answers only served to intensify the underlying mystery, casting a long shadow over the daily operations of the royal household. Meanwhile, Prince William found himself increasingly and irresistibly drawn toward these persistent anomalies, determined to seek the clarity that everyone else seemed desperate to avoid. As the future king, William had spent his entire life being rigorously educated on the paramount importance of royal tradition and institutional transparency. He understood deeply that protecting the monarchy required absolute integrity, especially concerning matters that affected the legacy of his late grandmother. Reports suggest that as fragmented pieces of information slowly began to reach his desk, a powerful intuition took hold of him, convincing him that something extraordinarily significant was being intentionally buried beneath the administrative surface. This was not a mere bureaucratic oversight. It was a matter that struck at the core of Catherine's future status and the late Queen's ultimate vision for the continuity of the crown. The deeper William investigated the situation, the more unsettling the reality became. Small, seemingly minor inconsistencies in archive logs became impossible for him to ignore, and he noticed that long-standing conversations among senior courtiers would abruptly terminate whenever the topic of the late Queen's private estate was introduced. What had initially begun as a quiet, personal curiosity was rapidly transforming into an impending institutional crisis, representing a fundamental struggle over legacy, internal influence, and the future moral direction of the monarchy itself. Although nobody within the palace could yet predict just how far-reaching the consequences of this discovery would be, one reality was becoming undeniably clear. The unfolding drama surrounding this hidden letter was not drawing to a close, but was instead roaring into its most volatile chapter yet. What had commenced as a silent quest for truth would soon force Prince William to confront a complex web of promises, secrets, and ambitions that threatened to rewrite the unwritten rules of the royal house. The atmosphere within the ancient stone walls of the palace had grown heavy with unspoken truths, but to fully comprehend the storm that was brewing, one must look back at the quiet foundation of a decades-old promise. Long before Catherine became one of the most beloved and admired women in the world, she was being meticulously, almost invisibly, prepared for a destiny far greater than the public could have ever anticipated. Her initiation into the royal fold was never merely about acquiring grand titles, attending lavish state banquets, or wearing beautiful designer garments. It was fundamentally about stewardship, institutional legacy, and a profound, lifelong responsibility to the crown. According to persistent whispers from those deep within the palace walls, the late Queen Elizabeth II had spent years quietly ensuring that some of the monarchy's most historically significant and treasured heirlooms would eventually find their rightful home in the hands of the future queen. As the mystery surrounding the hidden letter began to consume the thoughts of senior royals, the spotlight naturally returned to Catherine, the woman whose ultimate destiny seemed most intricately bound to the document's silent pages. Catherine's journey into the heart of the royal family had never been a path of effortless privilege or sudden, unquestioned acceptance. Instead, it was an arduous, decade-long test of endurance, marked by immense patience, emotional restraint, and an unwavering willingness to carry burdens that would have easily broken others. Over many years, these quiet but powerful qualities earned her something far more enduring than fleeting public applause. They earned her the absolute, unshakable trust of the sovereign. For generations, The royal jewels had possessed a significance that extended vastly beyond their staggering monetary valuation. To an outside observer, these sparkling diamonds and historic gemstones might have appeared as magnificent accessories reserved for moments of state theater and grand pageantry. But within the sacred machinery of the monarchy, they served as physical vessels of continuity, representing the unbroken lineage between reigns and the enduring spirit of the crown. Every major piece in the vaults carried the living memories of previous queens, legendary princesses, and the most pivotal moments in the nation's history. Their true value was never measured in carats or gold, but in the powerful message they sent to the world about who was trusted to carry the flame of royal tradition forward. This deep, symbolic understanding was something Catherine seemed to grasp instinctively from her very first days inside the family. While other individuals within the royal orbit often focused on personal prominence, glamour, or individual status, she consistently projected an image of selfless duty and quiet service. Reports suggest that Queen Elizabeth II noticed this rare quality very early on, viewing Catherine not as a temporary addition to the family, but as a crucial pillar for the monarchy's survival in the modern era. Palace observers frequently describe their relationship as one built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of sacrifice, rather than dramatic public displays of affection. Although the late queen rarely revealed her deepest personal opinions to the public, her deliberate actions spoke with resounding clarity. The gradual entrustment of highly sensitive patronages, the prominent roles given to Catherine during major state events, and the increasing significance of her public profile all pointed toward a grand, long-term plan that had been carefully drafted behind closed doors. As the years progressed, a firm expectation took root within the royal household that Catherine would naturally inherit the stewardship of the late queen's most personal and historically vital jewelry collection. It was viewed as the natural order of succession, a seamless passing of the torch from one iconic era to the next. Yet, beneath these widespread assumptions, rumors continued to linger that more formal, legally binding arrangements had been made in secret. There were whispers of private ledgers, confidential codicils, and hidden instructions known only to the monarch and her closest personal executors. These rumors remained dormant for years, dismissed as mere myth, until the discovery of the hidden letters suddenly shattered the peace of the palace. Suddenly, every expectation regarding the inheritance of the royal treasures was subjected to intense, aggressive scrutiny. If Queen Elizabeth II had indeed left behind explicit written instructions, what exactly did she intend for Catherine's future? Had the princess's inheritance been securely locked away, or were there loopholes within the document that could allow others to redirect these priceless symbols of the crown? For Prince William, these questions were no longer academic debates about historical precedent. They had become deeply personal, striking at the very heart of his family's honor. The realization that Catherine's rightful place in the monarchy's future might have been altered or challenged by decisions made in secret, without his knowledge, filled him with a quiet, burning resolve. He became absolutely determined to uncover the full, unvarnished truth, regardless of the institutional cost. However, while William was beginning his desperate search for clarity, another highly influential figure inside the palace was reportedly pursuing a vastly different vision for the future of the crown's treasures. Power within a constitutional monarchy is rarely exercised through public declarations. Instead, it flows through quiet conversations, strategic relationships, and the subtle manipulation of institutional influence. By the time King Charles III ascended the throne, Queen Camilla's position within the palace had become stronger and more consolidated than ever before. According to various whispered accounts circulating among veteran palace observers, this newly acquired influence was beginning to extend into highly sensitive areas that many had assumed were off-limits, including the long-term distribution of the late Queen's private estate. As Prince William wrestled with the disturbing implications of what might be hidden, the focus of the palace dynamic began to shift toward Camilla, whose dramatic transformation from a controversial figure to the most powerful woman in the kingdom had redefined the internal politics of the royal household. Camilla's journey to the center of royal life had been long, exceptionally complicated, and constantly shadowed by intense public debate. Yet, With the dawn of King Charles's reign, there was no denying that her authority had reached a level that few could have imagined possible in decades past. She was no longer just the king's supportive spouse. She had become a formidable force within the daily operations of the monarchy, occupying a unique position of trust that granted her direct access to the most private decisions occurring behind closed doors. This rapid consolidation of influence naturally sparked concern among traditionalists within the court. According to insiders, the months following the coronation were marked by a noticeable shift in the palace's internal power balance. New alliances were quietly forged, old court structures were systematically adapted, and long-standing family traditions faced subtle but persistent pressure from the realities of a new reign. While the family continued to present an image of absolute stability to the public, a very different story of territorial disputes and silent negotiations was unfolding in the private offices of the palace. At the very center of these quiet debates was the future of the late Queen's personal jewel collection. For generations, the inheritance pathway for these significant heirlooms had followed a predictable trajectory, rooted in the preservation of tradition. The unquestioned assumption had always been that these pieces would eventually pass to Catherine as the future queen consort, securing her symbolic status. However, troubling rumors began to surface, suggesting that alternative arrangements were being actively explored behind the scenes. Some observers believed that existing estate distributions were being systematically reviewed, while others suspected a deliberate effort to alter the long-held expectations surrounding future ownership and access. For those who revered royal history, these whispers were deeply alarming. The royal jewels were not mere accessories to be bartered or redirected based on personal preference. They were sacred links in an unbroken chain connecting the past, present, and future of the British sovereign. Altering that chain, even in the slightest detail, carried grave institutional consequences that went far beyond a simple family disagreement. It raised fundamental questions about the sanctity of a monarch's final wishes and whether established traditions could be quietly dismantled by personal influence. Meanwhile, Prince William was becoming acutely aware that crucial conversations regarding his wife's future were taking place entirely without his consent or participation. Fragmented reports and whispered warnings began to reach him from multiple independent sources within the household. While none of these leaks offered a complete picture, when pieced together, they formed a highly disturbing pattern. There were vague references to confidential agreements, mentions of unwritten understandings, and persistent suggestions that the distribution of the late Queen's personal legacy was not proceeding as originally planned. The future king became increasingly convinced that a profound truth was being hidden from him, shielded by a wall of polite silence and bureaucratic delay. And at the absolute center of this unfolding mystery stood the enigmatic letter. The mere existence of this document had transformed what should have been a routine transition of heritage into a high-stakes constitutional battle. If the letter did indeed contain the definitive, written wishes of Queen Elizabeth II, it possessed the immense power to validate Catherine's rightful inheritance while completely dismantling any alternative plans that had been quietly set in motion. The agonizing uncertainty surrounding its contents only served to deepen the internal divisions within the family. As the weeks dragged on, William's determination hardened into an absolute mission. The possibility that his grandmother's final, sacred intentions had been kept hidden from him for years was something his sense of duty could no longer tolerate. He knew that somewhere within the highly restricted archives of the palace lay the key to a mystery that threatened to permanently alter the relationships at the absolute highest levels of the British monarchy, and he was fully prepared to tear down the walls of secrecy to find it. The moment of reckoning finally arrived when Prince William, driven by an unyielding determination that had hardened over months of suspicion, managed to bypass the layers of bureaucratic delays and secure access to the highly confidential document. Holding the physical letter in his hands, bearing the unmistakable royal seal of his late grandmother, William knew that the course of the monarchy's future was about to be decided on the contents of these silent pages. As he carefully reviewed the elegant, handwritten script of the late Queen Elizabeth II, any lingering doubts he had harbored immediately evaporated, replaced by a profound and overwhelming sense of clarity. The letter did not contain vague suggestions or open-ended thoughts. Instead, it was a precise, highly detailed, and legally firm codicil that explicitly outlined the sovereign's final intentions for her most treasured personal jewelry collection. The late queen had written with absolute deliberate focus, stating that these specific, historically significant heirlooms, which had defined her own historic reign, were to be preserved in an unbroken line of succession specifically for Catherine, the future queen consort. For William, reading these words was both a moment of intense vindication and deep, simmering anger. It became painfully obvious that the whispers of alternative arrangements and systematic reviews of the estate were not mere misunderstandings, but an active, quiet campaign to bypass the explicit wishes of the late monarch. Armed with this undeniable proof, William resolved that silence was no longer an option, and the time had come to bring this hidden conflict into the light, setting the stage for an unprecedented confrontation at the very heart of the royal household. The atmosphere inside the private offices of the palace grew freezing cold when William initiated a direct, face-to-face meeting with King Charles III and Queen Camilla. This was not a standard family discussion about administrative affairs. It was an intense, high-stakes clash of principles and competing visions for the future of the crown. Standing firm as the protector of his wife's rightful legacy and his grandmother's sacred honor, William reportedly presented the document, demanding that the late queen's written wishes be respected and executed without any further delays or subtle modifications. According to palace insiders, the confrontation carried an intensity that had not been felt within the royal walls for decades, exposing deep-seated tensions that had been quietly building since the start of the new reign. On one side of the table stood the future king, representing the unyielding defense of tradition, continuity, and the sanctity of a monarch's final decree. On the other side stood Queen Camilla, whose faction within the court argued that a modern reign required flexibility, practical reorganization of royal assets, and the recognition of the current queen's sovereign authority. For King Charles, the situation was nothing short of an agonizing, deeply painful emotional dilemma that tested his loyalties to their absolute limits. The king found himself trapped in a devastating position, caught directly between his deeply beloved wife, who had stood by his side through the most turbulent storms of his life, and his eldest son and heir, who held the undeniable proof of his mother's final intentions. Every option available to the king carried devastating consequences for the internal harmony of his family. Supporting William's demands risked alienating Camilla and undermining her hard-won authority within the palace, while ignoring the letter risked creating a permanent, irreparable rift with his successor and betraying the sacred legacy of Queen Elizabeth II. As the private debates intensified behind closed doors, the pressure on the monarch to make a definitive, binding decision reached a boiling point, threatening to shatter the carefully maintained public image of royal stability. Yet, perhaps the most extraordinary and telling aspect of this entire crisis was the response of Catherine herself. While the powerful figures around her engaged in sharp arguments, strategic alliances, and intense battles for influence, the Princess of Wales chose a path of absolute, majestic silence. She did not release defensive statements, she did not allow her allies to leak angry responses to the press, and she completely refused to participate in the political maneuvering occurring within the palace walls. Instead, Catherine remained utterly focused on her royal duties, appearing in public with her signature warmth, grace, and an unwavering composure that captivated the nation. This dignified restraint did not represent weakness. Rather, it was a display of immense inner strength that echoed the legendary poise of the late Queen Elizabeth II herself. By rising entirely above the domestic drama, Catherine sent a powerful, unspoken message to both the court and the public that she did not need to fight for symbols of status, because her true worth was defined by her selfless service and her absolute commitment to the people. This quiet approach gradually shifted the entire narrative of the conflict. The longer Catherine remained above the fray, the more the public viewed her not just as a future queen, but as the true, spiritual custodian of the monarchy's most enduring values. In the end, The intense struggle over the hidden letter and the royal jewels was never really about the material wealth of shimmering diamonds or priceless gemstones. It was a profound battle over the very soul and future identity of the British monarchy, testing whether the institution would be guided by the personal influence of the present era or by the sacred, unbroken traditions of the past. As the dust slowly began to settle, the reality of the late Queen's documented wishes became impossible for the palace administration to ignore, forcing a quiet reassurance that the legacy intended for Catherine would indeed be protected. The crisis revealed that the crown's most valuable treasures are not locked away in dark, fortified vaults, but are carried forward in the character, duty, and dignity of those who are trusted to wear them. Through her patience, her silence, and her unwavering grace throughout the storm, Catherine proved to the world that she was more than ready to carry the torch of royal tradition into the next generation, ensuring that the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II would endure, unbroken and untarnished, for many years to come.
What began as a personal concern regarding Catherine's future role was gradually being interpreted as something larger, a defense of continuity, at a moment when uncertainty threatened to reshape long-standing expectations. For Charles, that growing momentum only intensified the emotional burden. Every possible decision carried consequences. Supporting one side risked alienating the other. Delaying action risked deepening divisions. Remaining neutral appeared increasingly possible. According to insiders, the king became acutely